The Houston Cougars blitzed West Virginia in their inaugural Big 12 game, but Kansas, Andy, they needed a little help from the refs to secure their first Big 12 win of the season.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your hosts. That guy right over there that I'm pointing to is Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade, and we are so glad to be with you. We want to thank, in particular, you everydayers for joining us to get your college basketball content every single day. If you haven't already, come join our Discord as well, where you can get even more of that college basketball content every day. We have great conversations in there. Andy and I are part of it. Leaf Tulin, who joins us every week, is part of it. The link's in the show notes. Would love to have you. Today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jase case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50-plus infections. Get yours today at jasemedical.com. All right, Andy, we're going to get to Undefeated Watch here in just a second, but we are down to one. Wild stuff there. Now, Andy, we got to say, it's sad. You and I have both been putting away our Christmas decorations this weekend. And while that's sad on a personal level, it's great news because it means that we're getting into conference play and it's January. That said, there were so many storylines, so many games this weekend. There's no way we'll hit them all today. So we'll do a lot. Then we'll also touch on quite a few on Tuesday's show because, quite frankly, with the football national championship tonight, there just ain't much college basketball action. By the way, if you haven't voted for us on the Sports Podcast Awards, we'd love for you to do that. We are up for Best Basketball Podcast in and amongst a bunch of NBA shows. So please come join us in that. All right, Andy. Let's start by talking Big 12 today because it was a very eventful day on Saturday. First Big 12 games of the season, and it reminded us what a bonkers conference this is. We're going to talk about Houston here in just a second along with the rest of the action, but let's start in Lawrence, Kansas, where Andy, the Jayhawks, who seemingly never lose at Fog Allen Fieldhouse, were in some trouble on Saturday. I was keeping up with this one as I was building some kind of cabinet for my family, and it was hilarious. Kansas ends up winning 83-81. But the story everyone's talking about is this. In the closing moments of the game, TCU is up 2, gets a rebound. Ernest Uday, former Jayhawk, by the way, pitches a little outlet pass ahead. And as he takes off down the court, his elbow kind of goes behind him, maybe on purpose, maybe not. We'll never know. But he catches Hunter Dickinson in the mouth. Everyone's taken off down the court, and Hunter Dickinson falls. At that point, the refs stop the play, and they go to the monitor and review things. Ultimately, award Hunter Dickinson 2 free throws and Kansas the ball. So instead of TCU being up 2 with the ball, the game is now tied and Kansas has the ball. The Jayhawks go on to win. Would TCU have won? We will never know. Andy, what do you think about this call?
Well, the first thing that popped in my head when I saw that this happened was that it's a little bit of karma in the sense that TCU absolutely didn't earn their win over Georgetown earlier this year.
Right. I didn't even think about that. Because
of a referee mistake.
Yes.
That one was a clear mistake by the officials. We've kind of harped on that a few times on this show and kind of jokingly referred to that as what should have been a win for Georgetown. Now, obviously, I think nobody wants to lose to Georgetown. That would be a bad loss, but I think you'd trade that if you knew you got a chance to beat Kansas at Fog Allen Fieldhouse. But it is unfortunate that TCU has been involved in 2 of the biggest officiating controversies of the season. They've gone 1-1 in those 2 contests. I just thought that was a weird coincidence. I don't think there's any, wasn't actually intended to be retribution in some sense. But for me, I understand why the officials and why the NCAA has made a stronger push to prevent elbows to the face and certain injuries, especially towards like the top of the body where players can get seriously hurt. I don't think that in a vacuum, changing the rules as they have the last few years to be more to look for more flagrant fouls, to be more intentional about calling them. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but there is a time and a place. And certainly in this situation, I think the kind of combination of refs being more particular about flagrant fouls while we're also trying to police the game and prevent flopping, and you kind of trying to do both those things at the same time can be complicated. And in this situation, that's kind of what happened, where we had a situation of, is this flopping? Is this, something that the refs are trying really hard to get out of college basketball? Or is it a flagrant foul, something the refs are also trying to get out of college basketball? And all of that happening in conjunction with this being a really close game, closing seconds, start of Big 12 play, one of the most premier programs in college basketball, a team that rarely loses at home. Like, it was this kind of perfect storm of various situations in college basketball all coming together. On top of all of that, it involved perhaps the most polarizing player in college basketball in Hunter Dickinson. You couldn't have written a more complete story for this game to have had than all of those things colliding at once. I think referees are I do think that we call too many flagrant fouls. I think we go to the monitor on flagrants too often. I've seen a handful of them in recent games where it's like, okay, let's just play on. Let's not necessarily let that happen. I think personally in the closing seconds, close game, it should have to be pretty egregious. Refs should more or less swallow their whistles in the close game closing seconds. They didn't do that here. It was unfortunate it went against TCU in this situation. I don't agree with the call. I don't know if it necessarily means that TCU 100% guaranteed absolutely would have won this game, but I'm going to tell you right now, there's a lot of pretty upset people in Fort Worth, and I understand why.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing where you stop it for player safety, and TCU has the ball and is going the other way. I feel like you got to let that play out.
Yeah, agreed.
And if Dickinson's down in a pool of blood, sure, that's a whole different conversation. But if the play starts coming back the other way, Kansas gets possession, then you stop it and do it. Because for my money's worth, Andy, had Dickinson not fallen, which I frankly don't know that he needed to, maybe. I know it hurt, but still, they wouldn't have stopped play. And so, hey, good decision by him. As we record this on Sunday, the Golden Globes are tonight. He might have won a little award for that one. Andy, I was laughing because Hunter Dickinson afterwards said, quote, "It just hurt a lot. It hurt pretty bad. Fortunately, they called it for us. It hurt, but I'm here standing. I'm strong." Andy, he was literally not standing.
Not standing.
So I was like, but in all seriousness, what a game for Hunter Dickinson. 30 points, 11 rebounds. I believe I had read a stat that he's the only player in Division I with multiple 30-10 games this season. If I could be wrong about that, but I feel like I saw that in the aftermath of the game. So great stuff there. And you know what? Kansas has a win in the record book. TCU doesn't. I love you pointing out the karma of that. Andy, let's move on to elsewhere in the Big 12 because stuff's happening all over the place. Houston is playing their first ever Big 12 game. They are coming into Saturday, one of 3 remaining undefeated teams. And now as we sit here, they stand alone atop the undefeated mountain because they absolutely obliterated West Virginia on Saturday. And then James Madison lost at Southern Miss. And then Tennessee, talk about obliteration. Ole Miss went tumbling 90-64 in that one. So, Andy, a little preview. I'm actually, why I like having these two teams together, Kansas and Houston, I'm going to now flip-flop them in my top 25, move Houston up to number 2 and Kansas down to number 3.
Join me. I think I've had Houston number 2 for like a month.
You have.
Now, so I'm quite happy.
Coming around, Andy. I'm coming around
on that one. Yeah, what a game from Houston here. Absolutely destroyed West Virginia. And look, the criticism for Houston has continued to be their strength of schedule, and them getting to open against probably the weakest team in the Big 12 is probably not helping. Those doubters are probably just as loud as they've been before. Like, oh, great.
That was my reason. Yeah.
Right. But they didn't beat West Virginia by 6. Meanwhile, Baylor has to go to overtime to beat Oklahoma State, arguably the other weakest team in the conference. BYU loses to Cincinnati. Like, it is hard to win in the Big 12, no matter who you are playing. Heck, I mean, we just talked about it. Kansas struggled with TCU. TCU is a good team, but that's still a team Kansas should be beating. So if you blow somebody out in the Big 12, if West Virginia gets blown out in every other Big 12 game this year, which I don't think will happen, but until they get Jesse Edwards back, it's going to be a problem for them. But Houston has not, you cannot criticize them for blasting a team like West Virginia. That's still a big win for them. So for me, Cougs right now, I still have them below Purdue. It's hard to find a way to argue them over Purdue unless Purdue stumbles again. But this Houston team has looked really, really good, and LJ Cryer was a monster in this game. 20 points for him.
No reason they couldn't win the Big 12 in their first year. I cannot wait for Houston, Kansas. That's going to be fun. Andy, elsewhere, we mentioned it's an eventful Big 12 day. Let's just quickly fire through those. You already mentioned Cincinnati won at BYU 71-60. Yeah. BYU's been off to a good start, but this is a massive win for Cincinnati. We'll talk about them more on Tuesday's show. You mentioned Baylor winning 75-70 in Stillwater in overtime. Two other games of note is that Iowa State lost at Oklahoma 71-63. We'd been wondering about Iowa State. The computers loved them. We wondered, are they legit? We didn't know, again, because of strength of schedule. And Andy, where I'm at, just in the immediate aftermath of that, is Iowa State is solid and they're good. But lots of good teams are going to lose at Oklahoma. So we just need more data points still with the Cyclones. And then in the state of Texas, those Red Raiders go to Austin and beat Texas 78-67. Andy, hopefully the AP poll catches up to where we've been and gets the Longhorns out of that top 25.
Yeah, if they do, it's possible Tech is the team replacing them. They're 12-2 right now. Pretty nice resume for Grant McCasland and the Red Raiders. But Isaac, speaking of resumes, speaking of teams on the bubble, Seton Hall, they are continuing to build an at-large resume, while FAU, they might be jeopardizing theirs. We're going to talk about that after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. The NFL regular season just wrapped up, but there is still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place any $5 bet. That's $150 in your pocket, win or lose. The FanDuel app is super easy to use. There are so many different ways to bet. You can bet on money lines, point spreads, player props, and more. You can also find live same-game parlays, and you can find other bets in the new Explore tab, while also making a parlay in the new Parlay Hub, the best way to find those popular parlays. Right now, we're gonna switch away from talking about college basketball odds and talk about the national championship. Michigan, 5.5-point favorites over Washington. We will give our predictions for that game at the end of the show. But right now, folks, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, Isaac, let's start with Florida Atlantic, the Owls, because they took another loss, another quad four. Isaac, they have two quad four losses on the year. They lose at Charlotte. Tough loss for the Owls right now. They are, did they lose to Charlotte? Did I have that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
Did have that right. Okay, good. They're 11-4 on the season. They're 27th in the net. So I don't think they're quite in that, like, they need to win the American Athletic Conference territory. But Isaac, this resume is starting to look a little shaky here as we get into January.
Yep, and here's the thing. Thankfully, this Charlotte loss was not a quad four like the other two that they had. Right. This one's just quad two, and so that's kind of thankful. But Andy, basically, big picture, here's where I'm at. I am not yet worried about FAU from an at-large standpoint. What I am noticing is that each time bracketology comes out, they're going to be falling lower and lower. So whereas they could have been in a position just based on preseason perception, we all know how that factors into things. Yeah. And then based on winning games like Arizona, that they were in legit conversation to be, 2, 3, 4, 5 seed. But now probably what's happening is they're pushing themselves back to more like a 9 seed like they were last year. And you're not always going to be able to rely on FDU beating the #1 seed on the other side. And so I think this is where it's at as we're here in early January. I'm not worried about FAU at large, their at large accolades yet, but I am worried that they're jeopardizing their seeding.
Yeah, I think the main thing for them is the same thing that all mid-major programs struggle with, especially when you get to this point in the year, is you just don't have as many opportunities. You not only have less opportunities to pick up quad one games and wins over ranked opponents and the kind of thing that you need to kind of solidify a resume, but you also have more chances to hurt your resume. You have more quad three games, more quad four games. This is something that, teams like Gonzaga and St. Mary's have battled so much in the WCC, where, half to 2/3 of your games are played against teams that if you lose, it's a resume killer. And that's kind of the case for FAU right now. As we are talking right now, SMU and Memphis are currently playing each other, and how this game goes will sort of determine, or at least have a big role in determining how many quad one games are going to be left for the Owls, because right now, they only have 2 left on their schedule. At Memphis on February 25th, Memphis is 49th at the net, so a road game there is at quad one. At North Texas on March 6th, but North Texas is 69th in the net. So the odds of that being a quad one game are kind of 50-50. It's sort of up in the air right now whether that game remains. SMU is 39th in the net, and if they end up pulling off a victory here over Memphis, they could climb closer to being in that top 30, whereas that home matchup for FAU could then become a quad one game. Those teams right now, SMU is up 4 as we're recording this with 10 minutes left. It's going to be a really, really close game, but ultimately FAU just they don't have many opportunities to really pad the resume, where they have plenty of opportunities to continue to drop it. And I think that's what puts Dusty May's team in a pretty precarious position. And if they hadn't lost any quad 4 games, we'd think, oh, well, they're going to be fine. They're going to roll through all those bad teams, but they already have 2 of them. If you take 3, you're in a really, really rough spot where not only are you probably in that 8-9 territory, even if you win the conference, if you don't, you might not be in the big dance.
And I don't with those 2 quad 4 losses, the FGCU loss is certainly not going to change. Like, there's no chance. I could maybe see Bryant moving up a little bit, but at best it could get to quad 3. Those to me are both going to stay in quad 4. And that's where, as you said, like if they hadn't lost those, you look at the Charlotte game on Saturday and you're like, it happens in conference play. It's a quad 2 loss, whatever, you move on. But that's not where it's at. By the way, that was a great ending to that game, Andy. I thought FAU was going to come all the way back. John L. Davis hit that tying 3 with like 14 seconds left, and I was like, oh, the Owls are about to do this. But great resolve by Charlotte to pull it out. Maybe a foul could have been called on the last play of the game at the buzzer, but we'll see.
Yeah, shout out for the 49ers. That's a good club. They won the CBI last year. They're not a pushover team by any stretch, but still obviously a tough loss for FAU. And speaking of tough losses, Marquette takes a loss to Seton Hall. And we talk about what this means for the Golden Eagles on another time, but I want to continue the conversation that we had last week as well about Shaheen Holloway and the Pirates, because we kind of wondered, hey, are they starting to maybe put together a bit of a resume that could, if you squint, maybe could look like a team that makes the NCAA tournament? And now, now they got wins over UConn, Marquette, and Providence. That's a really nice trio of victories. They also have a win over Missouri. I'm not sure how well that win's going to age. I think Missouri is going to have a tough time.
They just lost again on Saturday.
Yeah, they lost again. I think they're going to have a tough time in the SEC, but that's still at the very least 3 good wins. Another win over an SEC team never hurts. We talked about this last week. Their losses, they have 1 quad 3 loss and 2 quad 2 losses, which certainly doesn't look great, but the teams they've lost to, and they also have the 2 quad 1 losses, are USC and Iowa on neutral sites. USC hasn't played all that well, but that's not a terrible loss for them. No. Baylor and Xavier on the road, not really concerned about either of those losses. A road loss at Xavier in conference play is understandable. They lost to Rutgers at home. That's far and away their worst loss, but that's not terrible. Like, this is a team, they're 73rd in the net right now. So I think that the argument that they are currently a team in position to be an at-large, no, they're not there yet.
No.
But they have these 3 really good wins, and they're not done. I think there's a real chance that Seton Hall, if they pick off a few more teams, if they don't drop a game to DePaul, don't drop a game to Georgetown or even Butler or somebody like that, if you can avoid those, maybe pick up a win over Villanova, maybe pick up a win over St. John's, like Shaheen Holloway and the Pirates, they could be in a position here where they're actually talking about a bubble team in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, the concern, Andy, for me is we've seen so often these teams that are really bubbly. The committee starts looking at their non-conference strength of schedule.
Yeah.
And that's where Seton Hall gets burned. I'm looking at KenPom right now. Their non-conference strength of schedule was 204th. Their overall strength of schedule is 48th. So the Big East is helping them out in a big way. And thankfully, these 3 big wins that they've just secured have all been in the Big East. And so that also helps, is to be doing that. And so all you can do if you're Seton Hall right now, you've got that weak non-conference strength of schedule. So all you can do is just keep trying to stack wins in the Big East and hope that that's going to be enough. And in fact, right now, there's a 4-way tie, Andy, atop the Big East. Seton Hall, UConn, St. John's, and Villanova are
all expected.
They're all 3-1 right now. Meanwhile, Creighton and Marquette, the two teams we thought would be at the top, they're only one game behind, but they are still both 2-2. That's wild that both Creighton and Marquette have 2 Big East losses after 4 games. So, we talked about how wacky the Big 12 is going to be. Man, that Big East, something fun going on there as well.
One more quick point I wanted to make here before we get into our 6-pack. I always feel bad for teams that attempted to schedule a good non-conference and it didn't work out because the other teams didn't do their part, because you can't control that. Like Seton Hall thought, okay, we got USC, they're going to be a top 25 team. We're good there. We got Iowa, they're usually pretty good in the Big Ten. We got Missouri, they're coming off being an NCAA tournament team. Like, what are the odds that all 3 of those teams are going to crap the bed this year? And they did. It's just unfortunate for if you're Seton Hall and you're like, oh, the resume is going to, or the committee is going to hold our non-conference strength of schedule against us, which I think you're right. They probably will. And it's like, how frustrating is that when that's not your fault? It's USC's, that's just as somebody who follows Gonzaga basketball very closely, that's something they're dealing with too, where 2 of their best wins are against USC and UCLA, 2 teams that have not nearly performed at expectation. And it's one of those things where you can't control it. And it's just part of life, part of college basketball.
And the other thing is the teams that are top 100 at KenPom are the 4 games they lost in non-con. Missouri is their best non-con win, and right now they are even themselves outside the top 100.
Yep.
Oh, man. Well, Andy, the weekend got off to a great start on Friday night. Purdue picked up a top 10 victory over Illinois, and Auburn, Andy, they look like a true SEC contender right now. We got all of that and more in today's 6-pack. And we'll get to that in just a second, right after I tell you that this episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by Jase Medical. Look, I know we come to sports to escape some of the crazy realities of life, but let's just talk for a minute about preparing for what happens when life really comes at you. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics right now, like amoxicillin, right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if someone I loved was getting sick while a supply chain issue kept them from getting the medications they needed. Thankfully, though, there's Jase Medical. The Jase case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, all of that among others. This could happen to any of us at any time. So visit jasemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It'll be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jasemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. All right, Andy, as we do every Monday, we're going to wrap up the show with a 6-pack, number 6 of which, by the way, as you said earlier, we're going to pick our national champion. And so we'll do that coming up here in a second. But we want to start by looking at Auburn, who talk about, we've had a couple of obliterations today. My word.
Yeah.
I saw a friend of mine at church this morning who's a big Arkansas fan. I live, for those who don't know, like an hour and a half north of Fayetteville. And he was like, Isaac, I was there. I was in Bud Walton Arena, and it was embarrassing. Oof. Auburn wins this game 83-51. I believe the biggest loss in Bud Walton Arena history. My goodness. Just great stuff from Auburn. Janai Broom had 14 and 8 with 3 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. Love seeing him just fill out the stat sheet like that. The Tigers go 7 of 18 from 3. Andy, you and I have said it a lot, kind of similar to like Iowa State, right? Like these computer number darlings that we weren't really sure totally what to make of them yet. And here they are proving it, showing it in a big way. They're 12-2. We know that they lost opening night to Baylor. They also lost at App State, to me, a very forgivable loss. Wins now over USC, Indiana, Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, and now Arkansas. Their, to me, biggest win of the season on the road. Is Auburn ready to be real contenders at the north of the SEC along with Tennessee and Kentucky?
I think so. I mean, I think we'll learn more as the SEC play goes on about whether this win, in particular, the margin of victory, says more about Auburn or Arkansas. I have a feeling Arkansas is not going to get blown out by 30 plus points very often in conference play. And I don't think, I mean, if Kentucky beats them by that amount, or if Tennessee beats them by that amount, or certainly if they're taking losses to, LSU and Vanderbilt or whatever, then maybe our conversation shifts a little bit. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Arkansas is not as good as people expected, certainly, but they're a mid-level, maybe slightly below mid-level team in the SEC, and Auburn blew the doors off of them. And I think the reason Auburn is so highly regarded by those computer metrics is because they beat Indiana by close to 30. They blew out USC. They blew out, they're blowing out most of the teams that they're playing. They're beating them by a significant amount. And I think this game in particular kind of showcased they have the ability defensively to hold a good scoring Arkansas team to 51 points, and they have the ability to hang 83 on them on the road. And I think that, to me, is kind of a strong indication that this Auburn team, again, I think they're behind Kentucky. I think they're behind Tennessee. But to me, there's a top two in those two programs. There's a gap, and then there's Auburn, and then there's another gap. And then that's where you get the kind of Mississippi State, Florida, Ole Miss, maybe even South Carolina gets kind of tossed into that group, Alabama, Arkansas. They're kind of all bunched together in a way, but I think Auburn has separated themselves into a tier of their own right below that kind of Kentucky and Tennessee area. Isaac, next game that I wanted to talk about here, speaking of the Auburn Tigers, we're going to move over and talk about the Clemson Tigers.
Let's go, Tigers.
We've been discussing this a handful of times already. Clemson has this rich history of playing very well in the non-conference and then struggling pretty much as soon as they get into conference play. We said we don't think that's going to be the case for Clemson this year. We think they're too good. We may still be correct, but they haven't done a great job of proving that to be the point thus far. They lost to Miami, and then they lost now to North Carolina at home. Tough game. North Carolina played really well. Armando Bacot, very nice performance from him. The Tar Heels able to hold Clemson to 55 points because they shot 1 of 18 from 3, 1 of 18 from Clemson. They are now 1-2 in the ACC. They got a win over Pitt in December. Their January performance so far, those losses to Miami and North Carolina. I still think Clemson's a really solid team. Joe Girard didn't have a great performance, but PJ Hall looked good in this one. I think that they're going to probably right the ship here, but for those naysayers who continue to believe that Clemson's a program that only plays well in the non-conference, well, they got plenty of ammunition to hold on to those beliefs after a tough start for the Tigers in the ACC this week.
Yeah, and I think this is more about the schedule, Andy, than it is that Clemson's a fraud. I mean, they've got 3 losses now. At Memphis, they lost by 2. That's fine, whatever. And then Miami just went gangbusters on Wednesday night in the second half. And then North Carolina very sneakily has held 4 straight opponents under 70 points and is doing really well there. So for Clemson, they got, I think, great complementary pieces. Chase Hunter running the show. You got PJ Hall in the front court and Joe Girard in the back court as well. As you said, he was down on Saturday, not down injured, but just didn't have a good game. PJ Hall was like 10 points below his season average as well. But Ian Shefflin had a really good game. I think Brad Brownell's got the pieces, and we just got to stay patient with Clemson. They got a couple very winnable games here going forward, and so we'll keep our eyes on it. Andy, what's number 3 in the 6-pack?
We got Illinois at Purdue. We're almost 30 minutes into the show. We're finally talking about the number 1 team in the country. That's how packed this weekend was with games. And Illinois came in to Purdue and nearly pulled off the upset here. They outscored them by 10 in the second half. Zach Edey, kind of a quiet night, 10 points for him, but on 5 of 5 shooting. Regardless, the Boilermakers continue to do what they need to do, which is beat the best teams in the Big Ten. They're the number 1 team in the country still, and they proved it with that nice win over Illinois on Saturday.
Creighton gets a big-time home win over Providence on Saturday, 69-60. Finally, Andy, the Blue Jays play through Ryan Kalkbrenner, 22 points, 12 rebounds. You love to see it. Obviously, Providence is still kind of trying to figure out who they are in life without Bryce Hopkins. Great game for Devin Carter, 25 and 10. Creighton, much-needed win.
SEC play again. Kentucky goes to Florida. We were curious how this very young Wildcats team would play in a tough road environment, and we definitely saw some jitters early in the game. Florida had a lot of momentum in the first half, but Kentucky's talent won out. Aaron Bradshaw hit a huge three late in the game to help give the Wildcats a victory. When they have their big guys hitting three, their guards are playing as well as they are. Really, really nice performance from Kentucky. They're continuing to prove that they are the cream of the crop alongside Tennessee in the SEC.
All right, Andy, not much doing tonight on the college basketball slate. Literally the only conferences in action, CAA, MEAC, Southland, and SWAC. And so that gives us time to unpack more of the weekend on Tuesday's show, along with our CBB Top 25 poll. But because of that national champion game, we want to have the sixth part of our six-pack be making national champion picks. As you said earlier, at FanDuel, Michigan is favored by 5.5 over Washington. Andy, I'll go ahead and say mine. I'm going with the Huskies to both win and cover. I love Michael Penix, and I want to see this offense go bonkers to kind of shut Michigan down.
Yep, I'm with you 100%. I'm all Huskies. I think they're going to take this one. They've looked absolutely fantastic all year. They've quieted the doubters in a major way, and I think they're going to I absolutely think they're going to cover. I think they're also going to win this one outright as well and put together one of the most prolific college football seasons we've seen in a while, especially from a team on the West Coast. And that's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Really excited, as much as I've loved watching college basketball all weekend long, excited to watch a little football Monday night and watch this game. It's going to be really fun. But we'll be back on Tuesday with our top 25 conversation. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these games that we didn't get to fully in depth here before we get back into previewing some more games later in the week as the college football season wraps up. And it's all basketball all the way from now until March. We are almost at that point in the year. Thanks again for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Don't forget to join us on our Discord channel if you have not done so yet. It is free, and there is a link in the show notes. You can also vote for us in the Sports Podcast Awards. We'll have a link for that out there as well. Apologies to the Lawyer family. Go Wildcats and go Tigers today as well. And until tomorrow, peace.